People always ask me if I've ever been scared working as a park ranger in Denali. They want to hear about grizzly bear charges, getting lost in whiteout conditions, or maybe falling through ice into a frozen river. The truth is, in 15 years of patrolling 6 million acres of Alaskan wilderness, I've had my share of close calls, but fear wasn't usually part of the equation. Respect, caution, alertness, those were my constant companions. Fear was something I'd trained myself out of. Until September 2023. Until Wonder Lake. Until I saw something that made me question everything I thought I knew about the natural world. My name is Dr. Cassandra Wright, though everyone calls me Cass. I have a PhD in wildlife biology from UC Berkeley, but I gave up the academic track 12 years ago to work for the National Park Service. Some people thought I was crazy, trading tenure and research grants for a ranger's salary in a cabin with questionable heating. But I'd never felt more alive than when I was out in the backcountry, surrounded by mountains that made you feel small in the best possible way. Denali is different from other national parks. It's not like Yellowstone or Yosemite, where you can drive through on paved roads and see the highlights from your car. Denali is raw, remote, and largely untouched. There's one road, 92 miles long, and most of it is closed to private vehicles. The park is bigger than New Hampshire. You can hike for days and never see another human being. That's exactly what I loved about it. The incident happened during my annual late-season backcountry patrol. Every September, after the summer crowds have left and before the winter closure, I do a 2-week trek through the most remote sections of the park. It's part of my job, checking trail conditions, monitoring wildlife, making sure the backcountry camps are secure before the snow comes. But honestly, it's also the highlight of my year. 2 weeks of solitude, just me and the wilderness. I started my patrol on September 12th, heading out from Park Road Mile 85 near Wonder Lake. The plan was to trek north toward the Muldrow Glacier, then loop back west through the Clearwater drainage. Weather was good, clear skies, temperatures in the 40s during the day, dropping to the 20s at night. Perfect conditions. The first few days were routine. I documented a healthy caribou population moving through the eastern valleys, spotted a few grizzlies fattening up for hibernation. The blueberries were still good, and I supplemented my freeze-dried meals with handfuls of them whenever I could. I camped at designated backcountry sites, used my satellite phone to check in with the ranger station each evening, and fell asleep to the sound of the McKinley River in the distance. On day 5, September 16th, things started to feel off. I'd hiked about 12 miles that day, making good time through tundra country. The landscape in that part of Denali is like something from another planet. Rolling hills covered in rust-colored vegetation, mountains jutting up in every direction, braided rivers cutting silver channels through the valleys. You can see for miles, which is both exhilarating and unsettling. There's nowhere to hide, nothing between you and the immensity of nature. I made camp around 5 p.m. near a small creek, setting up my tent in a slight depression that would shield me from the wind. As I was filtering water, I noticed something strange. The birds had stopped singing. Now, I know that sounds like a cliché from a horror movie, but it's actually a significant observation. Bird behavior tells you a lot about what's happening in an environment. Sudden silence usually means a predator is nearby, an eagle, a fox, sometimes a bear. I immediately went into cautious mode, scanning the area, making sure my bear spray was accessible. But I didn't see anything. The tundra stretched empty in all directions. I finished setting up camp, cooked my dinner, some kind of chicken teriyaki freeze-dried thing that all tastes the same after a few days, and watched the sun get lower on the horizon. The light in Alaska in September is magical. Everything turns gold and pink, and the shadows stretch for miles. That's when I heard it, a sound I'd never heard before in all my years in the park. It started low, almost below the threshold of hearing, a humming or droning, rhythmic, coming from somewhere to the north. At first, I thought it might be a plane, but it didn't have the mechanical quality of an engine. It was more organic, almost like singing, but not quite. The sound would rise and fall, lasting for maybe 30 seconds, then stopping abruptly. Then it would start again, slightly different from a different direction. I grabbed my field recorder, I always carried one to document wildlife sounds, and tried to capture it, but the moment I hit record, the sound stopped. I waited, recording running, but heard only wind in the creek. Acoustic anomaly, I muttered to myself, making a note in my journal. Possible wind effects on terrain. Check weather data. But I didn't really believe it was wind. Wind doesn't sound purposeful. This sound had felt intentional somehow, though I couldn't explain why. I slept poorly that night. Every few hours I'd wake up, convinced I'd heard that sound again, but there was only silence. The kind of deep, complete silence you only get in true wilderness, miles from any human settlement. The next morning, I broke camp early. I told myself I was just sticking to my schedule, but the truth was I wanted to move. Staying in one place felt wrong. I hiked north, following a game trail through a valley flanked by steep ridges. The terrain was challenging, lots of loose scree, hidden holes where permafrost had melted, creek crossings that required careful navigation. It was the kind of hiking that demanded full attention, which was good because it kept me from obsessing over the strange sound from the night before. Around midday, I stopped for lunch on a small rise that gave me a good view of the surrounding area. I was eating an energy bar and updating my GPS coordinates when I noticed movement about half a mile away near the base of a ridge. At first, I thought it was caribou. We had a large herd in the area, and movement in the distance usually meant animals. But as I watched through my binoculars, I realized this wasn't caribou. It was too tall, too wrong. The figure, and it was a single figure, I was sure of that, was moving across the open tundra with a strange gait, not quite walking, not quite running. It was upright, definitely bipedal, but the proportions were off. The limbs seemed too long, the body too narrow. My first thought was person, but that didn't make sense. No one else had permits for this area. And besides, no person moved like that. My second thought was bear. Grizzlies can walk upright for short distances, especially when they're trying to get a better view of something, but this thing was moving too fluidly, covering ground too quickly. I watched it for maybe 2 minutes before it disappeared behind an outcropping of rock. My hands were shaking as I lowered the binoculars. Wildlife identification needed, I said out loud, my voice steadier than I felt. Unknown species, possibly bear, possibly... I don't know. I marked the location on my GPS and made a detailed note in my journal, including sketches of what I'd seen. The scientific part of my brain was already running through possibilities. Moose? They were in the park, but moose don't move like that. Wolverine? Way too big. Some kind of rare subspecies of bear that I wasn't familiar with? That seemed unlikely, but it was better than the alternative. The alternative being that I'd seen something that shouldn't exist. I decided to alter my route slightly to pass by where I'd seen the figure. It would add about an hour to my day, but my curiosity overruled my caution. I'm a scientist, after all. Unknown observations need to be investigated. The hike to the location took longer than expected. Distance in Alaska is deceptive. What looks like a short walk can take hours when you factor in terrain. By the time I reached the location where I'd seen the figure, it was nearly 4 p.m., and clouds were rolling in from the west. I found tracks immediately. They were in a patch of soft ground near a small creek. At first glance, they looked almost human. 2 feet, 5 toes on each foot, heel and ball clearly defined. But they were huge, at least 16 inches long, and the depth of the impression suggested something very heavy. I've seen bear tracks thousands of times. These weren't bear tracks. The toe arrangement was wrong, the heel was too pronounced, and there were no claw marks. I photographed them from every angle, placed my hand next to them for scale, and measured them with my field tape. My mind was racing. Bigfoot tracks. I was looking at what appeared to be Bigfoot tracks, except I didn't believe in Bigfoot. I had a PhD in wildlife biology. I'd spent years studying animal behavior and ecology. Bigfoot was a myth, a cultural legend with no scientific basis. Every sighting had been debunked or explained. There was no physical evidence, no bodies, no DNA samples that held up to scrutiny. And yet, here were tracks, real, physical tracks that I couldn't explain. I followed them for about 100 yards. They led up the ridge, the stride length suggesting whatever made them had been moving fast. At one point, I found where it had grabbed onto a boulder, leaving scratches in the lichen. The scratches were fresh, exposing the lighter rock underneath. Then the tracks disappeared. Not gradually, not fading into harder ground. They just stopped. One moment, I was following clear impressions. The next, there was nothing. I circled the area for 30 minutes, searching for where they picked up again, but found nothing. Then the tracks disappeared. Not gradually, not fading into harder ground. They just stopped. One moment I was following clear impressions, the next, there was nothing. I circled the area for 30 minutes, searching for where they picked up again, but found nothing. The clouds were getting darker, and I could smell rain coming. I needed to make camp before the weather turned. With one last look at the place where the tracks vanished, I hiked to a sheltered spot under a rock overhang and set up my tent. That night, the sound came back. It was around 11 p.m., and I was lying in my sleeping bag, reading by headlamp. The rain had started an hour earlier, a steady drizzle that pattered against the tent fly. Then, cutting through the rain, came that humming, droning, singing sound. But this time, it was closer. Much closer. It seemed to come from multiple directions at once, creating an eerie, stereophonic effect. The sound rose and fell, and now that I could hear it more clearly, I could make out what almost seemed like words. Not English, not any language I recognized, but something with rhythm and structure. A language. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I grabbed my bear spray with one hand and my field recorder with the other. This time, I got it. The recorder picked up at least 3 minutes of the sound before it faded away into the rain. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay in my tent, bear spray clutched in my hand, listening to every sound outside. The rain stopped around 2 a.m., and the silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. I kept expecting to hear footsteps, to see a shadow moving outside the tent, to hear that voice-like sound right next to me. But nothing happened. When dawn finally came, I unzipped the tent to find a clear morning, mist rising from the tundra, everything peaceful and normal. Except for the handprint on my tent. It was on the side of the tent facing away from the rock overhang, about 7 feet up. The print was huge, at least 12 inches across, with 5 distinct fingers. It had been pressed into the nylon hard enough to leave a clear impression, and there were traces of something dark, mud maybe, or something else outlining the ridges of what looked like fingerprints. I stared at it for a long time, my scientific mind warring with the primal fear that was telling me to run. Something had touched my tent in the night, something with hands, something tall enough to reach 7 feet without stretching. I photographed the handprint from every angle, took samples of the dark substance with cotton swabs from my first aid kit, and made detailed notes. Then I broke camp faster than I've ever broken camp in my life. My original plan had been to continue north for 3 more days before looping back. I scrapped that plan immediately. I was heading back to the ranger station, taking the most direct route possible. The hike back took 2.5 days of hard pushing. I barely slept, making camp late and breaking it early. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow in the distance made my heart race. I saw the figure 2 more times, once at a distance, watching me from a ridge, and once much closer, maybe 100 yards away, standing perfectly still in the twilight. Both times, I tried to get a clear photo, but my hands were shaking too badly, and by the time I steadied myself, it was gone. I have pictures, but they're blurry, inconclusive. They show something tall and upright, but you can't make out details. Typical cryptid photos, tantalizing but not proof. The sound came every night, always around the same time, always from multiple directions. I recorded it each time, hours of audio that I still have on my hard drive. On the third day, I reached the park road. I've never been so happy to see that rough gravel track in my life. A shuttle bus picked me up. I must have looked terrible because the driver didn't even question why I was coming out early, and I made it back to the ranger station by evening. I went straight to my supervisor, Jim Talbot, a career ranger who'd been with the Park Service for 30 years. Jim had seen everything in his time at Denali: rescues, bear attacks, missing hikers, you name it. I figured if anyone would take me seriously, it would be him. I showed him the photos, the audio recordings, the samples I'd collected. I walked him through everything that had happened, trying to stay calm and scientific in my presentation. Jim listened without interrupting. When he finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Cass, how long have you been in the backcountry alone?" 15 days, I said. "But Jim, I'm not—" 15 days is a long time, he said gently. Isolation can do strange things to perception. Add in the stress of being alone in bear country, the physical exhaustion. "I know what isolation does," I cut him off. "I've done this patrol 12 years. This wasn't hallucination or exhaustion. Look at the recordings. Look at the photos." Jim looked at them again. I could see the conflict on his face. He didn't want to dismiss me. I had a solid reputation. I wasn't known for flights of fancy, but he also didn't want to believe what I was showing him. "The photos are unclear," he said. "Could be a bear, moose, even another hiker. The audio is interesting, but it could be wind, could be equipment malfunction. The handprint," he trailed off, studying the photo of my tent. "That's harder to explain." "It's impossible to explain," I said, "unless you accept that something we don't have documented in the scientific literature is living in this park." Jim sighed. "Cass, you know I can't put in a report saying we might have a Sasquatch in Denali. The Park Service would laugh me out of the office. We'd both lose credibility." "Then what do you suggest?" "Take some time off," he said. "Get some rest. If you still feel the same way in a week or two, we can talk about organizing a follow-up expedition. Bring more equipment, more documentation tools, maybe another ranger as a witness." I wanted to argue, but I was exhausted. Maybe he was right. Maybe I did need rest. I spent the next week in my cabin, reviewing my evidence over and over. I sent the audio recordings to a colleague who specialized in bioacoustics. She confirmed that the sounds were organic, not mechanical or environmental, but couldn't identify the source. "No animal I'm familiar with makes sounds like that," she wrote. "But that doesn't mean it's not an animal we haven't properly documented yet." I sent the photos to everyone I could think of who might offer insight. Most were polite but dismissive. A few were genuinely intrigued. One cryptozoologist, a term I'd always privately mocked, offered to come to Alaska to help investigate. I politely declined. The substance from the handprint yielded nothing useful. It was mostly mud and plant matter with some protein residue that could have been from anything. I couldn't prove what I'd experienced. Everything I had was circumstantial, unclear, open to interpretation. In science, that's the same as having nothing. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd heard, and I knew that something was out there in the wilderness of Denali, something that didn't fit into our neat taxonomic categories. I went back to work after 2 weeks, but I haven't done a solo backcountry patrol since. I tell myself it's because I'm getting older, because the physical demands are too much. But the truth is, I'm scared. Not of bears or weather or getting lost. I'm scared of seeing it again. Other rangers have reported strange things over the years: sounds they couldn't identify, tracks that didn't match known species, feelings of being watched in remote areas. These reports are usually dismissed as misidentifications or the product of isolation. But now I wonder, how many of them saw what I saw? How many of them heard what I heard? The scientific part of me says that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and I don't have that evidence. The part of me that spent 5 nights in the wilderness with something unknown says that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Denali is 6 million acres. Most of it has never been thoroughly explored. The terrain is brutal, the weather is harsh, and wildlife is sparse. It's exactly the kind of place where an unknown species could survive, hidden from human observation, living in a way we don't understand. Or maybe Jim was right. Maybe it was isolation and exhaustion, and my brain making patterns out of random stimuli. Maybe I saw a bear, and my tired mind turned it into something else. Maybe the sounds were geological, some weird effects of wind and rock that I'd never encountered before. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that I still have nightmares about that handprint on my tent, about something standing in the darkness, watching me sleep, close enough to touch the nylon that separated us, about that humming, droning, singing sound that felt less like animal communication and more like something intelligent, something trying to speak. I've stopped talking about it at work. I've learned that people get uncomfortable when you suggest that maybe, just maybe, there are things in the wilderness that science hasn't cataloged yet. They want the natural world to be knowable, mappable, safe. The idea that something unknown could be out there, something that's managed to avoid documentation in an age of satellites and cameras and GPS, is unsettling. But wilderness by definition is wild, unpredictable, unknown. I still work at Denali. I still love the park, but I stay closer to the road now, closer to other people. I tell myself it's just practical, that I'm getting older and need to be more careful. But the truth is, I'm scared of what I might find if I went back to Wonder Lake, to that valley where the tracks disappeared, to that place where something touched my tent in the darkness. Sometimes late at night in my cabin, I listen to those recordings. That strange, almost language sound rises and falls through my speakers, and I wonder, was it trying to communicate? Was it warning me? Was it asking me something? I'll probably never know, and maybe that's okay. Maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Maybe wilderness needs to have spaces that remain wild, unknowable, untouched by human understanding. But God, I wish I knew what it was. I wish I had stayed calm enough to get a clear photo, smart enough to set up better recording equipment, brave enough to step outside my tent and see what was standing there in the darkness. I'm a scientist. I'm supposed to seek answers, to investigate, to document. But I'm also human, and humans are allowed to be afraid of things they don't understand. The backcountry permits are open for next season. My name is not on any of them. Jim hasn't asked why, and I haven't volunteered an explanation. We both know. Sometimes I think about that creature, if that's what it was. Is it still out there, beyond Wonder Lake, moving through the wilderness in ways we can't track? Does it know I saw it? Does it remember touching my tent, leaving its mark on the thin barrier between us? Or was there never anything there at all, except fear and exhaustion, and the human mind's desperate need to find meaning in chaos? I don't have answers. I just have questions, recordings that might mean nothing, photos that prove nothing, and the absolute certainty that for 5 nights in September 2023, I was not alone in that wilderness. And somewhere, in 6 million acres of Alaskan backcountry, something is out there. Maybe it always has been.